Now, this morning's Pyjama preaching had to be deleted for technical issues, so I'm delivering more or less the same thing this afternoon. Now, wherever you find references to water in the Bible, it's likely there is going to be one or more together of three types of symbolism. Firstly, water irrigates the desert. It is necessary for life. We are largely composed of water, and the symbolism of water as giving life is a very powerful and obvious one. Secondly, water is cleansing. It can be used for ritual cleansing and also, of course, for the removal of dirt. And the ritual of baptism for Christians by John the Baptist, adopted by Jesus and then conducted by Christians later on, was a powerfully symbolic cleansing ritual. And this is something that obviously makes a lot of sense. And one of the things that I would suggest actually is that it is extremely appropriate not just to undergo baptism as part of becoming a Christian, whether this happens as an infant or a grown-up by total immersion like as not, that the symbolic power of washing when you wish to slough off the past and start something new, even if it's just a new day, is a very strong power, and it's one that can be embraced. It's perhaps a good idea to wash and bathe, to clean things off when you're starting some new kind of venture. But the third piece of symbolism associated with water is a much more negative one than the other two, and this is the connection between water, death, and chaos. In ancient times, people sometimes saw the rain, saw floods and rivers and the sea as powerfully threatening, chaotic elements which had to be kept at bay by God's power. This is what we see in Genesis chapter 1, where God pours the waters back so that the earth can become a place of life. This is in contrast to Genesis chapter 2, where the water irrigates the dry land, so bringing life. So it's a kind of opposite piece of symbolism. But water as chaos, water as death and destruction is, again, a fundamental human piece of symbolism. And I remember some years ago, I used to have a recurring nightmare where I was plunged down into some mountain tarn where the sheer sides of the rock were going down, down, down into the water, and it seemed to be bottomless. And try as I might to swim to the top, I just found myself going further down. It was a terrifying experience, the weight of water on top of me. And also it is said that people suffering from depression sometimes feel that they're wading through water, that the medium in which they live is not the natural medium of air, but one very much like water, one that they have to struggle against simply to exist. And this too, I suppose, has a connection with the Christian ritual of baptism. And in the story of Jesus's baptism and his temptation in the wilderness in Mark 1, 9-15, which is one of this morning's readings. And in it, not only is Jesus undergoing ritual cleansing in order to start his ministry, not as Christians are keen to point out that he needed to be cleansed of any sin, but because he was identifying himself with the human race and indeed with the people of Israel who had come to be cleansed of their sins by the ritual of baptism conducted by John the Baptist. But in a sense, Jesus is also going down into the depths of chaos and death and tackling them and fighting against them and coming up triumphant. And so in a sense, his baptism is also prefiguring his own death and resurrection. And he is then taken by that very same spirit that he witnesses as his baptism into the wilderness, another symbolic concept of chaos and destruction, where the wild beasts, again chaotic, they're wild, they're not tamed, are with him, and he has to face attacks by spiritual forces perhaps, or simply by temptations to be the wrong kind of Messiah, to bottle out of what he's been called to do, or whatever. And he overcomes these challenges. And when we move to the extract from the letter of Peter, the idea of water and cleansing in baptism is juxtaposed very obviously with the idea of water as chaos and death and destruction, because Peter is referring to the flood, that terrible event in Genesis where the entire world is flooded because God wishes to purify it of its evil it is a time where God allows the waters of chaos to flood over the earth and only 8 people are saved. And in that reading, there is this extraordinary, curious reference to Jesus. Is he risen? Is it in the period between his death and resurrection? Peter doesn't make clear, but it's an extraordinary, mysterious reference to Jesus making a proclamation to the spirits in prison who are identified with rebels against God. Are they the generations of people who died in the flood? This is how some interpreters have taken it, and it's the interpretation I'm going to follow today, even though I know it's not the most common one that is found now. But I rather like it, and as nobody seems to know what this passage means, I think we can go with it. But if we're going to interpret it like this, then it fits in with Jesus's baptism, understood as going down into the depths to pull up whatever is found there. That Jesus's incarnation, his death and resurrection, is fundamentally an act of rescue, of going to the deepest parts of human nature, the deepest parts of the world, and rescuing what is to be found there. And I think just as Christians are called upon to imitate Jesus in the way they behave, and also to proclaim the benefits that they have received from Jesus, we can look at this twofold way of interpreting these readings. First of all, in the ways we can imitate Jesus, not just by being baptized, but to go to the dark places where other people are to be found in suffering and in need, and to engage in whatever rescue we can, to be there for other people. And tying it in, I suppose, with the idea of water as cleansing, one of the ways in which we can help other people is by the cleansing action that we can do. Something very obvious, something very mundane, like a parent washing a child, an infant who is not able to keep itself clean. And those who bring the cleansing to the elderly and disabled. Just washing somebody who can't wash themselves is a powerfully symbolic, loving act in which we can follow the example of Jesus. Even, for goodness sake, the traditional practice of washing a dead body, the final act of respect to somebody whose life has been taken from them. But we can also proclaim the way in which we benefit from what Jesus has done, how we can be powerfully moved perhaps by knowing that God himself has been down to the deepest, darkest places. There is no dark place that you can go to or find yourself in which has not been filled with God's presence and the darkness filled with his light. And even though in our daily lives we may find this very hard to believe, particularly when we're terribly miserable and everything's going wrong, this is the profoundest claim made by Christianity. Whatever you suffer, whatever goes wrong, God has been there, God knows what it's like, and that gives you hope that being in the darkness, being at the bottom of the pit, being at the bottom of the watery tarn is not the end of the story. That is not the last word that the universe has to tell you. So in these difficult times, perhaps this is a message of hope, but it is also a challenge that we should imitate the loving action of Jesus in going into the depths and rescuing who and what we find there.